On behalf of the National Coalition of 100 Black Women Incorporated, Dallas Metropolitan Chapter, and our president, Madam Sonia Irby, I would like to welcome you to our forum this evening. My name is Karen Callier, and I am the chair of the chapter's Education Committee, a duty I share with my co-chair, Ms. Sharon McDowell. Just to provide a little background on NCBW, our mission is to advocate on behalf of Black women and girls to promote leadership development and gender equity in the areas of health, education, and economic empowerment. Excuse me. Our mission is to see Black women and girls live in a world where socioeconomic inequality does not exist. We believe in gender equity, inclusion, respect, racial and social justice, integrity, accountability, economic empowerment, and collaboration. Today's event is entitled Hidden in Plain Sight. The goal of this forum is to bring awareness to the impact of human trafficking, as well as to provide education and resources to help rescue, restore, and empower trafficked teen girls, sexually exploited women, and their children. This informative forum will feature two dynamic panelists whose advocacy efforts are focused on raising sex trafficking awareness. The purpose of our session will be, therefore, to define human trafficking and the impact on its victims, identify the signs of trafficking, common recruitment methods, education and community resources, and how you can help. A few housekeeping items before we begin. To help keep background noise to a minimum, please be sure to keep your microphone muted. Feel free to type any questions you have throughout the forum in the chat. We have designated some time towards the end of the forum for questions and answers. At this time, I would like to now turn the program over to our moderator for the evening, my coalition sister, Ms. Tanzania Vincent.
Thank you, Karen, and good evening and welcome everyone. We're very excited to host a very, very important program, and I'm honored to serve as moderator for this evening's program. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our two guest speakers for this evening, and I'll read their bios. Our first guest is Ms. Courtney Heathcock. Courtney is the administrator and fundraising coordinator with Rescue Her. Rescue Her provides crisis response for adult female victims of trafficking in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And these are individuals who have just recovered from a very exploitive situation within the last 72 hours, or who are still being exploited and do need help leaving. In addition to crisis response, Rescue Her provides long-term advocacy services for adult female survivors of trafficking in the area, and that's through their empowerment program. The program focuses on empowerment in the areas of legal, independent living, such as housing, transportation, financial support, community, safe environment, as well as health, and that includes physical, emotional, and mental. And we're looking forward to learning more about that organization. Our second guest is Chiquita Tillman, and she was born and raised in Caruthersville, Missouri, but lived most of her life in the Los Angeles, California area. She's an inspirational speaker, author, and advocate, and she tirelessly works to bring awareness to sex trafficking by sharing her experience and the process of healing for victims. After surviving a life of abuse and sex trafficking, she has become an advocate on bringing awareness to educating individuals on sex trafficking and helping others to overcome that bondage to understand their worth. In 2009, she earned a bachelor's degree in theology and Christian counseling. In 2015, she published her autobiography titled, I Am a Ruby, Not a Sapphire, which tells the story of her journey into sex trafficking and her struggle to find her worth. Also in 2016, Chiquita became the business owner of Ruby's Inc. LLC. And in 2018, she was the survivor's voice at the Missouri State Capitol's Human Trafficking Rally. She also has been a guest speaker on various churches, talk radio shows, podcasts, organizations across the country. Overcoming her personal experiences does place her in a position to inspire and counsel others. So again, welcome Courtney, welcome Chiquita to our forum tonight. How's everybody doing?
Doing well.
Great.
Thank you. Doing well, thank you.
Again, thanks for joining us. So I thought I would start the conversation with Courtney. Courtney, tell us a little bit about, how did you get involved and how did Rescue Her start?
Yes, and I actually just wanted to mention, I think that you guys had started communicating with our fundraising coordinator, Emily Sims. So I actually am one of our victim advocates, and I'm over our long-term Empower program. So I actually work one-on-one with the survivors that we serve, and I have a bachelor's degree in social work and psychology, and I'm currently getting my master's in victim services management from Sam Houston State University. So just wanted to give that little backstory, but I have been working with Rescue Her for the past 3 years, and so kind of what we do, which you explained really well in explaining kind of more about our organization, is we kind of have two different sections of what we do. So we do adult crisis response, which, like you mentioned, is kind of that first 72 hours up to 30 days of a victim being recovered. And so that's oftentimes through local law enforcement, hospital ERs, victims calling our hotline themselves, or other agencies reaching out to us who have a victim that are needing our advocacy services. And so in that crisis response, it looks a lot like meeting any emergency medical needs, getting emergency shelter, getting clothes, getting food, whatever those basic needs are in that first kind of 72 hours to 30 days. And then we have our long-term Empower program, which is what I am over. And so these are for the women who are in our long-term program. And so they attend a weekly support group with us. They are assigned a volunteer mentor, which is just another added support for them. And then we do just monthly casework with them where we help them reach their goals and work towards things that they are really passionate about. And the really unique thing about our services is because we're not a restoration home or a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 type program, we have the benefit of being able to follow any of the survivors in our program wherever they go. So as long as they originate in the DFW area, we can serve them virtually if they move out of state, if they move to another location in Texas, whatever that may look like. And the other unique part about our services is that they don't end. So we will serve a survivor as long as they want to be in our program. Our hope is that they would get to independence and no longer need our services, but we've been working with some survivors for up to 3 years now. And so that's kind of what we do. I got involved with Rescue Her 3 years ago, and I came on staff as a victim advocate and over our local outreach efforts. And so we recently have kind of taken a step back from our local outreach that we were doing because we just were growing in our capacity. We wanted to focus on the women in our program as opposed to reaching women outside whenever we still need to grow to be able to help them realistically. And so that's kind of how I came on, and then I've helped pioneer our long-term program over the past 3 years. And so this year I stepped in kind of over our long-term program, which means I'm over all of our survivors in our program and they're on my caseload. And then I'm also over all of our volunteer mentors and just training them and mentoring them as well throughout working with the survivors in our program.
That's great, Courtney. And maybe we should take a step back and inform the audience. What exactly is human trafficking, and does it differ from smuggling? Or tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes. So human trafficking looks different depending on if you're working with youth 18 and older, or if you're working with adults. So for youth 18 and older, trafficking, specifically sex trafficking, is when a child's sexuality is traded for something of value. So that could be anything from for money, for rent, for food, for relationship, whatever that may be. Anyone under 18 is automatically considered a victim. But when you come to 18 and older and working with adults, that looks a little bit different. And one of three things has to be present. And this has to be present either for labor trafficking, for organ trafficking, or for sex trafficking. And those three things are force, fraud, and coercion. So force could be kidnapping or abuse. Fraud could be a false job offer, or coercion, which is what we see most often, which is kind of your romantic relationship type scenario. But the way that human trafficking differs from smuggling is that smuggling doesn't have to take place for it to be human trafficking. For the women that we serve, probably about 3/4 of them have been trafficked by their own family members. And we currently, in the past 3 years of working locally with victims here in the DFW area, have only worked with very few victims who actually didn't know their trafficker beforehand. And so that's kind of how that differs. But something key to note is that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was finalized in 2000, which means that legal action and things like that have only been taking place over the last 20 years, which means this is still a very new field. We're still learning, we're still growing, and we're still kind of figuring out how to best serve victims and survivors of trafficking, both here in DFW and in America in general.
So that's so interesting. And I think I heard you say that the majority of victims know their traffickers, if you will. And so talk to us a little bit more about, is it just women? Is it just girls? Like what statistics maybe can you share with us, and how that works? How does that look?
Yes. So we work specifically with adult female survivors, but youth can be victims of trafficking. Men can be victims of trafficking. Boys can be victims of trafficking. Even all the way, unfortunately, down to infants can be victims of trafficking, and so can older individuals. So really, trafficking can impact anyone. And so basically what trafficking is it's preying on vulnerabilities. And so that's what traffickers do, is they are very good at spotting vulnerabilities in individuals and preying on those vulnerabilities and grooming them and different things like that to meet those needs and to gain that trust to be able to then exploit the trust that they built. And so there's really not a one size fits all for who could be a victim of trafficking. And so that's why I am honored to be able to share and to have survivors tonight sharing, so that we can continue to educate that really it can happen to anyone. And that's kind of the sad reality of what trafficking is and what it's become, because trafficking is going to exist as long as demand exists. And so in order to really combat this issue, you have to combat the demand side of things, because we can rescue as many women as we can, but as long as the demand for trafficking and for sexual exploitation is still there, they're going to continue to find another girl and another woman and another child to continue to exploit until that demand no longer exists.
So this is really informative. And so what I want to do now is bring in Chiquita. So Chiquita, we talked about possible victims, and potentially it's someone that you might know. Tell us a little bit, tell us your story, and we can kind of get into the discussion from there.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So my story is a lot. It happens a lot. I'm one of the risk factors, and I experienced a lot of child abuse, physical and sexual. And I was one of a child that no one believed, no one wanted to hear or listen. And so around the age 12, I tried to commit suicide because I just couldn't take the abuse. My father was an alcoholic, and my mother, it was her boyfriends that were molesting me and so forth. So by the age of 15, I decided to run away. I just couldn't stay there any longer. So I took a bus to Los Angeles from a little small town, Crothersville. And once I got there, I figured that I would look up an aunt that lived there, that I heard lived there. Coming from a small town, you don't know anything about directory assistants. So once I got there, I didn't know anything. I didn't know how to find her. So I was downtown LA by myself, 15 years old, didn't know anyone. I ran out of money after a couple of days. So I wandered around. I had no place to sleep. I was afraid to say anything to anyone because I didn't want my mother to find me. But I was being watched by a recruiter and I didn't know that I was being watched. But a young boy approached me and we started talking and I was telling him about my aunt I wanted to find. He said, I'll help you find her. I'll help you you can come to my house and I'll feed you and so forth. And I was hungry, I was cold. So I went to the house. He did feed me. He gave me a bed to sleep in. And the next morning he crawled into that bed and he raped me. He then said I had to go with him to this apartment where a couple lived. And there was a black guy and there was a Caucasian lady. I asked him if I can use their restroom. And when I came out, he was gone. He had sold me to a pimp. So the guy was a pimp. I did resist and I was beaten very badly that night. I was made to go out on the street. She was to show me the ropes. This happened. I was beaten very badly that night again because I allowed a John to control the situation, which is against the rules. So after being on the streets for a while, they did what they call a prostitution sweep, which they gather up all the prostitutes that they run across. I was new to them, even though I had been out there for a month by this time. I was new to them, so they arrested me. I still lied about my age and my name because I still did not want my mother to find me. They took me to a women's jail. I spent the night in a women's jail. The next day, we went to court. They called my fake name. We went to court, and some of the ladies were explaining to me how they were going to how the process goes and everything. So they let me out they got me on loitering, nothing else. So I'm sitting outside the jail. I don't know where I am. And this Caucasian girl comes and sits next to me. And I'm not thinking anything because she's a female, not knowing at that time that they use female recruiters as well. So I'm sitting there and we're talking and I'm feeling comfortable because she's a female. And she said, you can come home with me. I'll help you. And I went home with her and there was 3 pimps in the house.
Wow.
So now I'm in a house and there's 3 pimps. So her pimp took control over me and he was worse than the first pimp. We were held in one room. We all had to sleep in one bed. We couldn't bathe without him standing there watching us bathe. We had to meet up. We had to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning, take a bath while he stood there. Then we were taken to the street corner, which is Sunset Boulevard. I'm sure y'all have heard of it. But we were there from 8 a.m. until 5 o'clock p.m., just like a job every day. And I've approached cops to try and get help, and they wanted sexual favors instead of helping.
Oh, that's
so yeah. So I was on the streets for a while. I became pregnant by the pimp, and after I think I was about 5 months, but I wasn't showing or anything. I was very sickly. I was staying in the store, and the security guard came in, and he wanted to talk to me. I didn't want to talk to him at first, but then I just heard this clear voice say, "Trust him." I talked to him. He said, "I'll come back at 5 o'clock to pick you up." I knew at 5 o'clock we were to be picked up by the pimp. So I didn't think I was going to get away, but he did come back at 5 o'clock. So did the pimp. And I was on the opposite side of the street. So I just lied and said I had another customer around the corner. And when I got around that corner, I just took off running. And that's how I got away. The security guard came back and rescued me off the streets and took me to his mother and his grandmother.
So, thank you so much for sharing this powerful testimony. Um, Give us a sense of like how long was that? So from the time you left your mother's home, went to LA, and all of these things happened, and then you finally found someone to rescue you. How long of a time was that?
About a year and a half.
A year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks for sharing. So this is interesting because the title of our program tonight is Hidden in Plain Sight. So maybe talk to us about, your thought process of not being able to maybe communicate prior to you finding the security guard. What was it like to be hidden in plain sight? Maybe share a little bit of that testimony for us.
Yes, it's really, really hard when you can't communicate that you're being held hostage. You know, you can't get away. You can't speak to anyone. You can't talk to anyone for fear of being beaten and or being killed. I mean, I was dragged to an alley once. With a knife. He was gonna slit my throat, and so that's a fear tactic. They instill in the girls and boys. So it is really there were so many of us hidden in plain sight. You're looking at someone hoping that they could just kind of see that you're in trouble and or a cop. And but no one wants to get involved. No one wants to and I'm trying to change that. Like if you see something, say something because you don't know. You never know. Even if you're not sure, it's better to just say it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was very difficult. It was very difficult not being able to get help from anyone or speak.
So Courtney, after hearing her testimony, is this a common thing that you've heard from the individuals that you've worked with? Do they have similar stories, or can you share a little bit about those experiences?
Yeah, I think, well, first, thank you so much for sharing. We need more survivor leaders to share. And that was kind of the first thing that came to mind is that talking about being hidden in plain sight is I think that there's a lot of over sensationalized information being shared, like earlier this year with the Wayfair situation and the movie Taken. And like oftentimes it doesn't look like that, but it's hard for victims to even realize that they are victims because that's not what's being portrayed. And so I think just all of you who are attending, coming to an event like this to learn what it actually looks like, I think is huge. And just to realize it's not always kidnapping. It is a lot of like what she's sharing about like recruiting and grooming and different things like that. And so I think that's one big step of just being really mindful of the information that you're taking in about human trafficking, I think is a really big step of how you guys can get involved in this fight. But yes, recruiting is a huge part of what trafficking is. But the sad reality is a lot of times, so when women are the recruiters, they're often referred to as bottom girls, which is basically like the second in command to the trafficker. A lot of times they're the ones collecting the money. Like she mentioned, they're the ones showing like the lay of the land and that kind of thing. But the unfortunate reality is a lot of times they were exploited before as well. But when like a bust happens or a sting and they're arrested, they are also arrested as traffickers because they were a part of that exploitation process. And so what's actually been really great about Dallas is that a lot of law enforcement attorneys and different things like that are noticing that. And we actually have a client that we're working with right now who was in jail for the past 3 years as a bottom girl. But as she was speaking with her attorney and things like that, her attorney quickly realized that she actually was a victim and connected her with us. And we've been working with her for the past 2 years, and she actually got released with like just probation earlier this year. And so I think that there's still a long way to go when it comes to law enforcement and things like that. But I think the really cool thing about DFW is that I think that the law enforcement here wants to be better and wants to learn and wants to be able to recognize and that kind of thing. We have a video on our website called Alexa's Story, and she was actually one of my very first clients. And the way that she actually was rescued was that a law enforcement officer noticed her outside of a convenience store and walked up to ask her if she needed help, and she couldn't say anything because her pimp was watching her, and the law enforcement officer pretended to arrest her so that she wouldn't get in trouble by her pimp. But then when she got to the jail, they called us, and we're still in contact with her today, almost 3 years later. So I think there's definitely, like I mentioned, still progress to be made on the legal side of things and the law enforcement side of things. But I definitely think specifically here in DFW that we're coming a long way. I know I'm a part of a ton of coalitions for the anti-trafficking movement here in Dallas-Fort Worth. And there are law enforcement officers at every single meeting, every single committee. And so I think we've definitely come a long way. But just to kind of touch on one other thing she mentioned was about kind of the fact that the first recruiter brought her into a home and he met her needs and he provided her food and a bed and all these things. We kind of, I don't know if you guys ever read the story as a kid, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, but that's like kind of how we explain what grooming is, you know, if you give a mouse a cookie, then he's going to want a glass of milk and then a plate and then a napkin. And then by the end of it, the mouse is halfway into your home. Well, grooming is the same way. I'm going to meet this need that you have, and then this one, and then this one. And then once I've gained your trust, then I'm going to exploit that trust that you've given me. And so I think that her story is very similar to a lot of the women that we've served. And I think that a lot of what she said is a lot of what we're still working on and still trying to get better at, is recognizing victims and knowing what to do when we recognize them and what are the next steps and how do we move forward and different things like that. And for us, we have a 24/7 crisis hotline that if you guys ever have questions or you see something and you're maybe concerned, you can always call our hotline. Or we also have a report a tip page on our website where we take any tips that you guys might have, and then we report them to law enforcement. And then if they end up taking action on those tips, then we are looped in to meet with and just offer emotional support and long-term services to the victims that they recover.
Thanks, Courtney, for sharing. And so again, kind of getting back to you, Chiquita, there are several questions that are coming through the chat. And again, some of these are very sensitive, but, you know, a common question is, you know, why didn't you run? Why didn't you leave? And then what made you then decide to reach out to the security guard and he was an advocate for you, and what happened after he rescued you? So if you could talk to us about that.
Why didn't I leave? Or why didn't I run?
Right. So that's a myth, right? That everyone, and again, you talked about sensationalism, or just run, just leave. So talk to us about the reality of the situation.
The reality is not easy to run, because in my case, he had men to watch us, to watch our every move. And again, you know, we slept in the same bed in one room. We couldn't leave out without him. We couldn't take a bath without him standing there. So it was not a situation where I could leave, I could run. And as far as the second question, what happened to me afterwards?
Right. So once the security guard, you know, helped you to escape, what happened after that? Tell us about that.
Okay, well, when he picked me up, he took me to a hotel and he went and got me some food, and he said, "Stay here. I'm going to bring my mother and my grandmother in the morning." I didn't believe him, but I felt safe because I was away from the pimp. And I went to sleep. And when I woke up, his mother and his grandmother actually did come with him. But when he went home, he told them about me and they said, no, leave her out there. She's probably hardcore. She's probably, disease riddled and everything. So he was like, no, but you taught me that if I saw someone who needed help, to help them. So they couldn't go back on what they taught him. So they came to the hotel and they took me into their home and they adopted me.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yes, they are my family.
and so happy to hear that. And so they're part of your family now.
They are my family. He's my big brother now.
Oh, that's awesome. So then tell us then, so then how do you turn from a victim of sex trafficking, abuse, etc., to an advocate? Tell us a little bit about that transition and what you do to help victims.
Transitioning from bondage to freedom is not easy. It's really, really hard. It's really difficult because you're suffering. Some of us suffer from PTSD, severe depression, anger issues. You're mentally, emotionally just really jacked up. And so for years, instead of I didn't know about counseling and so forth. So as an adult, I was acting out. I had a lot of mental and emotional instability going on until I received counseling. And I had to be counseled by someone who specialized in trauma, because you can't just go to any counselor with that level of trauma. So once I went through an extensive counseling, let me tell you, I was so free from a lot of things that I took responsibility for that I should not have as a child. And so once a lot of things were broken off of me, I knew I had to go back and help. Because that life it's horrific. And I do not want, if I can help it, I do not want any child to go through that, not even a little bit. So that's why I'm an advocate. That's why I'm very passionate about bringing awareness and helping out wherever I can in different organizations. I am a ruby, not a sapphire, because it took so many years for me to know my worth. I had very low self-esteem, and now I love me.
That's
I
great.
love me. Yes.
Oh, well, love to hear that. Love to hear that. So Courtney, tell us, what are the signs? Like, what can we look for? And Chiquita, you can help us as well. But if these girls, these boys, these women are hidden in plain sight, then what can we do from a community standpoint? What should we be looking for? What should we be listening to? Just like that security guard, he heard you. So talk to us about that, Courtney.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that we all can do is, when looking for signs, is to be mindful of what is normal and noticing the abnormalities. For instance, there is a gas station on Harry Hines Boulevard, which we all know what Harry Hines is known for. And if you pay attention, nobody is ever actually getting gas there. Like, everyone is just hovering around all of the tanks. There's cars there, but nobody's actually getting gas. And so we, after doing outreach there for a while, realized that, oh, this is where a lot of the pimps hang out to keep watch and to keep an eye on the girls that they have walking the track. And so in just your own communities and neighborhoods, you know what is normal, you know what things normally look like, and you can notice what's abnormal. Another example is there is also on Harry Hines this one area where like 3 semi trucks just park, and a bunch of girls are walking around nearby those semi trucks. Well, why wouldn't a semi truck park at a truck stop or somewhere else? Why are they parked in the middle of Dallas? You know what I mean? And so I think one of the ways is just by being mindful of what you see in your day-to-day life and what's normal and what's not normal. I think another sign to look for is just the control aspect of it. For instance, if you meet someone out in public and they're not able to speak for themselves, or they don't have control over their own money, or they don't know where they are, like just that power and control, you'll hopefully be able to notice it. And just having your normal conversations with people that you meet out and about, and then with people that you know. One of the biggest ways that you can combat human trafficking is by being a safe person for the people in your life, because like I mentioned at the beginning, traffickers are going to prey on vulnerability. And if you can be a safe person for others to process their vulnerability with, then you are making the trafficker's job a lot harder to recruit and manipulate and exploit these women. But something kind of on the opposite side of the signs to look for that I want to touch on, that she kind of touched on just a minute ago, is about like how she was able to leave. Well, what we've seen a lot is victims going back to their trafficker. And I just wanted to touch on that briefly, because we get that question a ton of, well, why do they go back if it's so bad? Well, there are a few different reasons. One is, although the trafficking community is negative and hostile, it's still a community. And so if you take a victim out of a community and put her into a shelter or a place where she's isolated or doesn't know anyone, it would make sense why she would want to go back, even though it was awful, because at least she had a family or a community. And oftentimes victims are trauma bonded to their trafficker or to other victims, where they feel connected to them, similar to like a domestic violence situation. Oftentimes we've had survivors in our program that have said they don't feel like they're good at anything else. Can you imagine going to a job interview after you've been exploited for the past 2 years and someone asks you why you don't have a job history, and like trying to explain and navigate that? And then also, just even if you don't have control over your money, you're living this lifestyle where this pimp is buying you all these things and you get used to it, and then it's easy to want to go back. And then also just the fear of, well, what if he finds me? What if something happens? What if all the things that he said comes true? And just all of these different controlling tactics are some of the reasons why victims may go back, which is why one of our biggest priorities is to connect the survivors that we work with community almost immediately, so that they're immediately engulfed in a positive, healthy community, so they don't have this desire to go back to what they feel like they have to do, because they want relationships. We all want relationships. We all want to be a part of a family and a community. And so I think that's also really important to touch on. But really the signs look different depending on youth versus adults. And I don't have quite as much knowledge on the youth side of things, but for adults, it's just a lot of that power and control, not really being able to speak for themselves, not really knowing, and then like where they are and things like that. And then also just that abnormality, being able to notice abnormalities. And then since you guys are based in Dallas, we actually have a video called Sex Trafficking in Our City, where myself and one of our other advocates drives around Dallas and Fort Worth, and we point out the signs and the things to look for and tell real life stories of survivors that we've worked with and where they were exploited in the DFW area. And so I can send that link out to whoever is communicating to you guys, and you guys can definitely check that out. It's also on our YouTube page, if you can find our YouTube as well. And so I think that will give a ton of insight on what to look for specifically in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And so, you touched on that vulnerable period where maybe they have escaped, maybe they've, something happened, there's an opportunity, there's that vulnerability. And then the period where, well, I don't have a sense of community, there's a tendency to go back. Chiquita, it sounds like you were able to find that community in your rescuer. So talk to us a little bit about that, and how did they help support you? Not just from that acute 72-hour period, but how did they rally around you and provide the support that you needed?
They were very, very, very supportive. They made sure I was never alone, and communication was there. They always checked on me. I just didn't get the counseling that I should have gotten at that time.
Mhm.
It wasn't until I was an adult.
Okay.
But they just rallied around me. They just showered me with love and support.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, and then just maybe one final question. Have you ever had a conversation, or is your biological family aware of what happened? And were you ever able to have those conversations about how everything even got started?
Thank you. I did. Actually, I reconnected with my biological family when I was 28, and it wasn't smooth at first. My mother, she didn't want to have any connections or anything of that nature. And my father, you know, he was still drinking and everything. So that connection wasn't there as well. But I did connect with the other, like my grandparents and, my aunts and uncles. And it was like maybe, I want to say maybe about 5 years after that initial first meeting, my mother opened up and we were able to have a conversation, and my father, and I just was honest with them about everything. I was healed at this point, so I was able to forgive them, and I let them know that I forgave them and I wanted to move forward. We never had like a mother daughter or father daughter bond,
Mm-hmm.
but we've been friends. My mother she just passed last November.
Sorry to
Um,
hear that.
my father and I are getting closer and closer and closer. We talk quite often now, and so there was a lot of healing before she passed. So
Oh, we're so happy to hear that.
yeah,
And so maybe, so we're just looking at the time, maybe just some final thoughts from you, Chiquita, about, what are you doing now? What would you like to say to us, and anyone else, like how we can help?
thank you so much for having me, first of all. But you definitely, if you see something, say something. There's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That number, if you want to write this down, is 888-373-7888. And they have resources across the country for every state. What I'm doing now, I'm an advocate, anti-human trafficking. I also wrote a book, which is called I Am a Ruby, Not a Sapphire. I assist a lot of different organizations. I talk to a lot of the youth, a lot of girls and boys, because boys are trafficked just as much as girls. They're not talked about. And working on my business, I have a business. Yeah, so I've done well for myself. I
Great.
mean, I'm just grateful to be here and just continue to raise awareness, because we really, really need that. We don't need to just raise it in January, but
Mhm.
every day, every day, it needs to be in the forefront. So just continue to raise awareness, continue to reach out to the different organizations in your state, and just rally behind them.
Thank you so much. Courtney, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm about to send the link to our website, and we have a learn more page where you can learn even more about human trafficking. We have on there some resources of different documentaries to watch, or books to read, or podcasts to listen to. And then I also shared the link to our sex trafficking in our city video, the YouTube link, if you guys want to watch that. It's only 30 minutes long, but really informative about what trafficking looks like here in DFW. But one of the ways that you can make the biggest impact is just by like I said, sharing accurate information so that when victims want to reach out, they can and they know how to. And so I've also included our 24/7 crisis hotline for adult female victims of sex trafficking. And then on our website, we also have a Get Help page if you're ever around someone that needs help and wants to fill it out maybe more discreetly instead of calling or texting a hotline. And we have that page as well. So I'm about to send that link. But honestly, we also have volunteer opportunities. We have volunteer mentorship where you can mentor a survivor in our program one-on-one. We have celebrations team where you can celebrate the survivors in our program by helping us wrap Christmas presents or getting birthday presents or whatever that may be. We have a handful of different ways that you can get involved. Make sure you follow us on social media. We're doing a really fun Valentine's Day campaign next week about women empowering women. And we also have an online store where we have t-shirts and jewelry and mugs and keychains and all kinds of things. And we're going to be doing a sale next week for that as well. And so that is kind of my last remarks, unless you guys have any other questions for us about how to get involved specifically in the DFW area. I am here to answer any of those as well.
Great. Thank you so much. This has just been so informative. We appreciate your transparency, your willingness to share. Thank you both for participating in the program. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Karen to wrap up our program. Thanks so much.
Didn't realize I was still muted. Thank you so much to everyone in attendance. I believe we'll have some final words from our president, Madam Sonia Irby, if I'm not mistaken.
I think before me, our first VP is going to provide some additional information.
Oh, excuse me.
Good evening and thank you. On behalf of Madam President Sonia Irby, myself, our chair and co-chair of the Education Committee, Ms. Karen Collier and Sharon McDowell, our moderator for the evening, Ms. Tanzania Vincent, and all of our committee members, Ms. Courtney Heathcock and Ms. Chiquita Tillman, we really want to thank you for your presence tonight and for opening up and sharing your stories, both yours, Ms. Tillman, your story is so powerful. And I believe when we speak truth to power, that things change. So I can see how you're changing and teaching us how to advocate. So we appreciate that. And Ms. Heathcock, to you and for your spirit and your generosity and working with victims and advocating on behalf of all victims of trafficking. So we appreciate you. We also, if we could go back to the previous slide for just a moment. The one with the QR codes on it. Okay. We also want to encourage our participants, if you have your phones with you, scan those QR codes and please support Rescue Her. We've heard a lot about Rescue Her this evening. You have the opportunity to support Rescue Her by scanning the QR code next to her image, as well as learning more information about the organization. And then we definitely want to continue to support you, Ms. Tillman. And so there's a QR code next to a beautiful image of her book. So we do ask that you scan those QR codes and support our panelists this evening. And again, we just thank you so much for coming and speaking truth to power for all of us. At this time, I do want to make a special presentation from the city of Dallas to our chapter and our president, Ms. Sonia Irby. And it reads, City of Dallas, special recognition, whereas the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Inc., NCBW, is an advocacy organization with over 30 years of work in the community. And whereas the NCBW's Dallas Metropolitan chapter was chartered in June of 2018, the mission of the Dallas Metropolitan chapter is to advocate on behalf of Black women and girls to promote leadership development and gender equity in the areas of health, education, and economic empowerment. The organization was founded on the principles of respect, inclusion, and justice. And whereas NCBW's national chapters seek to share information about sex trafficking with the community, for education is the first step in prevention and reform. To raise awareness, the Dallas Metropolitan chapter held their first sex trafficking program in June of 2020 in partnership with the Department of Family and Protective Services and the Office of Sheriff Brown. A second installment of the program series is scheduled for today, January 28, 2021, and includes a partnership with the sex trafficking organization Rescue Her and author Chiquita Tillman. And whereas the National Coalition of 100 Black Women, Inc. has and will remain dedicated to tackling startling statistics that reflect the reality of sex trafficking in our cities, according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, Texas reports the second greatest amount of sex trafficking cases in the United States. NCBW is helping raise awareness of this issue through their awareness program. Now, therefore, I, Eric Johnson, Mayor of the City of Dallas, and on behalf of the Dallas City Council, do hereby extend special recognition to National Coalition of 100 Black Women, the Dallas Metropolitan Chapter, where Ms. Sonia Irby is the president, for its admirable service to the city of Dallas, Texas. And it is signed, Mayor Eric Johnson, Mayor of the City of Dallas. And a copy of this, I believe, will be presented to our president at a later date. So again, we want to thank both of you for your powerful messages this evening. And again, we will continue to work with you, and we do encourage all of our participants to continue to support our panelists this evening. Thank you. Madam.
And yes, thank you again. I know we've said it 100 times, but we can't thank you enough, Courtney and Chiquita. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. You have definitely raised our level of awareness about human trafficking, and we hope everyone who joined us and everyone who will watch our presentation. I believe someone asked in the chat if this would be available, and we will upload a recording of tonight's event to our YouTube channel, so you can definitely find it on our YouTube channel, and we'll also post a link to our social media channels. So again, we always like to end our programs with some call to action for those of you who joined us and those of you who are listening. We want you to think about how you can help against the fight against sex trafficking. We encourage you to make note of all the signs that both Ms. Tillman and Ms. Heathcock have shared with us tonight. Be on the lookout for that suspicious activity when you're in hotels, airports, grocery stores, shopping centers, and malls. Again, the theme of our program tonight was hidden in plain sight. There were some links provided for you for Rescue Her and how to order Ms. Tillman's book. We encourage you to use Amazon Smile when you order her book, because we are a beneficiary of Amazon Smile. There are some other resources that are provided on the screen for information on human trafficking. And we ask you to continue to stay connected to us for our upcoming events. On February 11 through 13, we will be hosting our first inaugural 5K event. It is a fundraising event for our scholarship organization, so please do go to our websites and register for that event. You can walk with us live on the morning of the 13th, but you can walk at any time and log your time in the website. So please do get signed up for that and help us with our fundraising for scholarships this year. So please continue to connect with us on our social media sites. They're all listed here, as well as our website. And again, we want to thank our speakers tonight, our chair and co-chair, our moderator for this evening, and all of you who joined us. Thank you, and have a good night.